Stephen, can you hear us now? If so, if you'd like to give a short introduction.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, Stephen Meade, lifelong entrepreneur. Started 11 companies, and it's interesting, 5 of which were the first one in the world to have ever done something. When I was 22, I went to work at Travelers Group. I read 357 books in 6.5 years, trained 8,000 salespeople. But 1996, going way back, I'm that old. I wanted to have a book. I wanted somebody to build a website, process credit card orders, send me checks and mailing labels. I wanted to talk on stage and cash checks. I'm good at talking and cashing, and I suck at a lot of things in between. And in 96, it actually didn't exist. So we built one of the world's first, probably not the earliest one, but we built proprietary shopping carts. And then we used our merchant account to process credit card orders. And Visa shut us down in August because nobody believed the internet would work. And we actually had to convince them that we were an 800 service, not an internet provider. And they switched our merchant account to become the world's first merchant processors on the internet. Took that company public in 99. It's what went on to sort of become PayPal. In 2000, I actually tried to build a global currency, global electronic currency for cross-border settlement. B2B business settlement has always been a problem. And what we built, nobody in the world really understood. So fast forward, took 2 other companies public. I've had 3 public companies. And then what we're doing currently is a closed loop payment system. We built our own electronic currency, not token, not crypto, but we've built a way to do cross-border settlement using a proprietary electronic currency inside a closed marketplace, which helps, again, countries do settlement across border without ever converting to cash. So a lot of fun things through my history, but always around payment and B2B and big solutions.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Very interesting. And it seems like David isn't with us, so I'll just briefly introduce myself and talk about one project that might be relevant to what we're doing now, and then we'll put it back to all of you, and hopefully by the end of the session we'll have a good sense of what can be done with state-sponsored cryptocurrency. I've had sort of multiple backgrounds, a lot of consulting with the Big Four, and I also ran a $8.5 billion bank for a few years. Turned out to be a very troubled bank, so I got a good insight into the whole regulatory framework, and the bank was sold 4 times, and each time the banking commissioner insisted that I stayed on as the chairman, president, and CEO. We did finally manage to get it sold off in parts, and I was finally able to get out of that, what was actually to a large extent a nightmare. But we did get everyone their money back, and with interest, so I was happy about that. Now, following from that, in one of my consulting engagements, I got involved with state-sponsored cryptocurrency. This was about 8 years ago. And I was pretty enthusiastic about it. Probably true to say that at that point, I had more confidence in central banks and governments. That has eroded somewhat more recently, but I did talk to several governments, Zimbabwe, Somalia. Typically, the countries that have the biggest economic problems are the ones that were most interested. So I thought we could kick off this discussion with a quick overview, about 4 or 5 minutes, of some of the things that we talked about when we were proposing a state-sponsored cryptocurrency. Now technology has advanced, but maybe confidence in central banks has diminished a little bit. And of course, this is where Satoshi started Bitcoin, was because he felt the central banks were just printing too much money. And in fact, the Genesis block consists of a newspaper article about that very topic. So let's see if sharing works. I haven't tried it before, but we'll find out shortly. And I'll go ahead and see if I can share a deck. Okay. Okay, can you see that? I'll go quickly to full screen view, full screen mode. Okay, so let's say a little bit dated, and we'll just use this as a discussion kickoff point. That's Sandeep's suggestion. So it was for central banks. This is the idea. So we're giving up one of the prime benefits of Bitcoin was the decentralization of it and getting it away from central banks. But at the time, I was thinking we need the central banks involved for this to really move. That now it's moved independently of them, so it's not quite so critical. But the benefits, having taken away decentralization, there were still substantial benefits, even if it was going to be a state-run, central bank-run cryptocurrency. One is that you've got much more control over economic policy, and you have more economic levers, much more control of money supply, money velocity. You can have stimulus down to the citizen level in a much more effective way than we've been trying lately. And you've got a sophisticated control over the balance between anonymity and transparency. And we'll talk about that probably during the session. And you can also peg that currency to any kind of assets you wish, your traditional cash currency or a basket of assets, gold, whatever. And in fact, when Zimbabwe, we were talking about a sophisticated transition from the US dollar, which they are on, back to a Zimbabwean dollar, which they wanted to get back onto. And we were proposing an algorithm based on those two, depending upon the strength of their economy. Needless to say, it all went south. So the other benefit is we get banking for the unbanked. You know, we've still got over half the world is unbanked, and it provides very simple banking. All they need is a very cheap smartphone. Remove a major vector for disease. Obviously, this was written long before the pandemic, but you know, every dollar you pull out of your wallet is a petri dish in effect. Eliminate counterfeiting. Major problems throughout the world. Originally, it was a private enterprise. Now it seems to be a state-level enterprise for some countries. Not naming any names. Anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, and eliminate corruption. It has tremendous opportunities there. And the thinking there was that we could allow people to have anonymous accounts that would be set up by the banks to keep the banks useful, so to speak. But that if the overview showed that there was very suspicious activity with one particular account, then a warrant could be obtained to see the identity of that account, but only if certain thresholds of suspiciousness were met. Retain control in political chaos. I remember I was talking with Somalia and Zimbabwe, so the thought was that even in the worst case of insurrection, they could still continue to run and maintain their currency. I mean, when Vietnam went down, and most people aren't aware of this story, but I should say, perhaps we, went straight to the central bank and gathered up the gold and flew that out of the country. Obviously, in the case of cryptocurrency, a cryptocurrency-based currency, then that's not possible. Seigniorage, you know, basically, countries make a lot of money out of printing money. They have done since Middle Ages, and you greatly reduce the cost of printing money if it's a cryptocurrency, obviously. At the moment in the US, it costs us more to mint the pennies than to actually produce them. I mean, than their face value. And also, it gives you the opportunity for very sophisticated big data. You can study the crops, you know, what's the best crop to grow in a certain country, and you can follow the sale of that crop, and you can go right down throughout the value chain and get very sophisticated analytics. But by having a currency that you've added a few extra fields into. And then, of course, you avoid the payments tax. The whole payments industry is effectively a large tax on global trade, or some might view it as such. And then finally, you get a national platform for reform, and maybe Swaneet can talk about that in a few moments as well, because would it make sense to have a national blockchain? And I'd be interested to know Swaneet's thoughts on, would his application be better remaining on a private blockchain, or would there be some value in having a common national blockchain? So those are just a few topics to get the conversation going. I'll stop sharing now, and I'll just end it out actually with how badly it can go, which is the failed currencies. That's one of my favorite slides to remind us that the central banks haven't always done a good job. So I'm going to end sharing now if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Okay, so we're back to normal now. Maybe Sandeep, you can talk about a little bit about the various flavors of policy on cryptocurrency that India has engaged in over time.
Sure, yeah. What's interesting is, again, you started off talking about the benefits of a virtual currency. And what's interesting, if you look back the last 8 years or 9 years, it just brings us to the point where they are seriously on the table. But what I'll do is I'll take 3 or 4 minutes and just kind of summarize the trajectory, at least we've been on. Okay. So, and what's interesting is just like almost all the countries, with the central, and especially the central banks, India's challenge is the same, right? The fact is that these currencies aren't controlled by a central authority. So what that has done is that has made the crypto acceptance like a start, stop, restart, then, the stop again kind of a story, moving from skepticism to bans to acceptance and maybe growth. But just again, what's interesting is, it started off really back very early in 2012 when software developers were taking Bitcoin payments, and there was a reasonable transaction volume, and mostly from the US to get paid for software. And even we saw the first exchanges like back in 2013, but it's about just then that digital payments started coming on, and then Reserve Bank issued these alerts saying, that these are risky assets, and intentionally slowed them off. And but in the process, we did start slowly moving back 2013 from cryptos. They kind of got put on the shelf and started moving towards digital payments. And then again, in 2015 was further slowed down because that was when we had all the scandals of Silk Road, and there was generally this global outrage about use of Bitcoin for financing illegal laundering, terrorist fraud, everything. And but the inflection point is interestingly was 2016 for India, which is in the aftermath of this demonetization that retired the higher volume notes, the 500 and the thousands, just sort of went away. And 86% of the cash kind of like was wiped out almost overnight, and in a short period had that's what accelerated move to digital currency, and exchanges started getting born. And so what we have now, the Zeb, Bitcoin, Secure, Unicorn, all these exchanges. So they really came all after 2016. So we started seeing that growth. And but then again, as I said, it's like always start growing and then stop again. So in 2018, there's another break. The Reserve Bank basically stopped the banks from accepting or dealing with cryptocurrency. And it also, in addition to heavily warning the consumers against investing. But if the banks are blocked, that is a slowdown. And what is really interesting, it's about, I think in that time frame, started looking into a central bank controlled digital currency, or the virtual currency, you just talked about it. So on one hand, you want to discourage it. You want to tell the banks not to take private currency, which is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the other stable coins, but then slowly start biasing or injecting that let's move towards a central currency. And then, so this continued for a couple of years. And then last year in 2020, that was overturned just when the markets globally started taking off. So Supreme Court basically said it was an unconstitutional ban for banks not to accept cryptocurrency. And that did change things quite a bit. Suddenly we saw a huge increase in adoption. And so one would think that, at least we now start getting the same picture we see in US, China. But this is all fine, started growing till we had earlier this year in 2000. I think it was about the March timeframe when there was a new bill introduced, which basically wanted to outlaw all private cryptocurrencies. It didn't quite go into effect, but it was a proposal on the table, caused a lot of disruption, and I think messaging confusion on a minimum. And so the idea was to stop everything and just go towards a central bank issued currency. And again, this was a few weeks later again denied by the ministry. So as you see, we start something, ban it, take the ban away. Let's start growth again. So that's how it's been going. But having said that, here's the real picture, right? Today, while Bitcoin's crossed about $1 trillion, India, it is still significant. It's about estimated based on a report from Chain Analysis, we're about 6 to 7 billion back in May. So it's not a huge number, but it's not zero. That once you're in the billions, then there's enough inertia, there's enough participation that is sort of not stoppable. And despite some other standards, and then as recent as about a couple of months ago, the focus started moving that if we're going to have, this is going to be unstoppable, so let's focus on taxation. And the big change has been in terms of us at a couple of places. One is asking foreign exchanges to pay same 18% is the the GST tax for goods and services on transactions with Indian citizens, and sort of make it about the same as what's done for trading stocks and futures. Which is the commission and the expenses on the transactions. So it brings that's one revenue channel that created, and then in additional. So to bring all the foreign activity in the exchanges that operate and where, with Indian consumers participating, putting an additional equalization tax. So it's moved to a couple of areas, right? One is the central bank currency is becoming slowly real. The taxation pieces are there. And what's going away is a proposal, I think, which was kind of like last year, was to completely outlaw all crypto, which is the 2020 announcement saying that it would be one of the toughest policies against crypto, which is the kind of criminalized possession, as the phrase goes, which just doesn't. It's just not practical in the world we live in. And to summarize that, I think where we are is really at this stage is China driven. So again, to your point, what you just sort of started off with, John, is China has very aggressively moved to central currency. For a number of reasons, you pointed a few of them, and I think what it looks, and so have a few of the other countries, and it looks like India is basically at this stage in a real wait and see, and then make a decision. But that's the direction we are headed in. And then as we move in the panel, we'll come back and can get into the details of what it could look like.
Sure. I mean, I think we are definitely moving in that direction. According to the head of the European Central Bank, there's 80 different countries looking at a national cryptocurrency at the moment. So I think it is coming. Maybe, Swaneet, you can now talk a little bit about whether you think a national cryptocurrency could have further application in terms of having a national blockchain for applications to run on. I'd be curious to know if you think your application would be better on a private blockchain, or would there be some advantages of having a national blockchain?
Yeah, look, I completely thanks, Sandeep, for the chronological sequence of events. I completely echo your thoughts. The way I just wanted to go back to that for 1 second. The way I think about India from a private cryptocurrencies perspective is there are three main aspects that drive the sort of regulatory inertia that we require for this to become sort of mainstream, right? So one is you have got SEBI, right? So SEBI's job is effectively that are cryptocurrencies a security or are they not a security? So I think that's one sort of bucket that needs to be sort of thought about and looked at. There are certain governments across the world that have created guidelines to make clear what is a digital asset versus a security, and they've put some structures in place. Singapore is one such country, right? Second part is FEMA. FEMA is concerned, India is a non-repatriable currency, right? And so FEMA's the concern is effectively the outflow and inflow of money in and out of the country, and I think that is a deep and important aspect for the government to consider in order to legalize, so to speak, cryptocurrencies or private cryptocurrencies. And then the third aspect is income tax, right? Or tax in general. So, how would you consider this asset? They'd be concerned about, hey, if you make a gain on this asset, then you need to pay tax on it. And so what they're concerned about is if people are making gains on these assets and not disclosing them, that kind of falls into that does fall into the illegal aspect of things. So that's how I sort of view the the regulatory landscape in India. And please, anybody here chime in if I've missed or omitted anything. In terms of your question on whether a national cryptocurrency or a national digital currency, central bank digital currency, CBDC as people are now starting to call it, is warranted. I think the government is strongly looking and considering this aspect. I think that this government is super sophisticated, and they have a successful track record of implementing digital infrastructure at a large scale, right? So look at Aadhaar card, look at UPI, eSign, DigiLocker, GSTN. So they've implemented several initiatives at a large scale that have been successful in a country like India with 1.3 billion people. It's not an easy country to manage, right? And so the way I think about it is that there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of different aspects to be considered. I agree with Sandeep that it's a wait and watch sort of scenario that the government is in. I think the government is clear about, and I'm not speaking for the government at all, but I think that they understand that blockchain as a technology definitely has a lot of benefits for a country like India, right? Number one, the technological advancements, the intellectual capital that we have in this country. For instance, use cases such as putting the land registry on a government blockchain, so to speak, will make things a lot easier. So I certainly think that the government is strongly considering and thinking about whether to implement a national central banking digital currency. That's I think it's kind of clear with what they're saying, etc. I know that there's a lot of industry bodies in India that are providing information. There are several unicorn exchanges, as you mentioned, in India right now, which are doing phenomenally well, and there's a lot of inertia there. I think for our platform, we started in 2019, exactly the time when the RBI actually issued that notice. So what we did was we quickly pivoted our model and converted it into a private blockchain model. And so the way our platform runs right now is on a Microsoft Quorum. Quorum is a JP Morgan Microsoft centralized blockchain, and we sort of run our rewards economy on that blockchain. And so we will continue to use that until the time where things are sort of very certain in the industry. I'd love to hear Stephen's thoughts on this, because I watched his video on El Salvador, and although the countries are not very similar at all, I think, I'd love to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I think a lot of the difficulty in our industry is in terminology to begin with. Calling everything a cryptocurrency is like saying everything is money when we have multiple forms of payment that perform multiple functions. So to me, most cryptocurrencies aren't currencies, they're glorified penny stocks. People buy a token at 10 cents because they want to sell it at $1. They don't buy it because they think they can buy a cup of coffee. So having banks look at regulating cryptocurrencies like their currency, I was just on a panel in the US and I said, this is crazy. Banks aren't allowed to custody stocks. Why are they going to custody tokens? Just because somebody called it a currency, it's not. Most of them are forms of payment. Even El Salvador, as was referenced, El Salvador is not really accepting Bitcoin as a currency. They're accepting it as a form of payment, which means if somebody sends $10,000 into the bank in the Cologne, the El Salvador bank gets the base currency. If somebody sends 10,000 in Bitcoin in, El Salvador is converting Bitcoin to US dollars. They're accepting it as a form of payment. They aren't taking Bitcoin as a currency and holding it as a currency and using it for future payment. So we have all these different distinctions. Even Bitcoin is not a currency and never will be. And I know people hate when I say that. It's a potential form of payment. Just like Apple stock, if I can pay you in Apple stock or gold. But if you're a small business and you accept Bitcoin for a $3 cup of coffee and it drops 20%, you don't care. Somebody pays you $3 million and it drops 3%, you care. So having Bitcoin as a fluctuating asset used as a base currency is a complete fallacy for businesses. It can't happen just because of the fluctuation. And then we move to central digital bank. The central digital notes to me are just another form of payment. If I pay somebody in debit cards, debits are digital dollars. They just go through an old school network of cash. ACH, Swift, Fedwire, these old school networks move cash digitally. It's still digital, but it's on a network that's slow. It's like driving on a highway that's crowded. We're using digital settlement, whether it's Ripple or a digital dollar, moves on a faster network. So I believe all countries are going to have their own stable digital coin that equals a base currency. Like what we've done, ours equals $1, and then the prices float to the base currency. If I have money in Wells Fargo and I want to, wire transfer somebody and it's $50,000 transfer, it takes 24 to 48 hours on the legacy network to move digital cash, traditional dollars. If I convert it to a Wells Fargo token, which is running on Ripple, send it across to JP Morgan to Swaneet, which is running on Quorum, they're both digital dollars. It'll convert from a Wells Fargo token to a JP Morgan token and then up convert to fiat cash if I want it. So cryptocurrency is not a universal settle-all. Bitcoin will never be a currency. Most banks will come up with their own digital settlement. And I think the banks and the countries will come up with their own digital token, which equals something stable. You need a stable unit, not a cryptocurrency that fluctuates in order to have payment. So with that, I'll turn it over to whoever wants to agree or disagree.
Okay, well, let me
Steve,
here and then pass them out to all of you.
Yeah, hang on, Swaneet, go ahead. John, hold on one second.
I have a question. So do you view Bitcoin as an asset class? Is that right?
I view Bitcoin as an asset class like gold. Less so than stock. I view it like a gold. It's a functional unit. A brick of gold, $600,000. A unit of Bitcoin's 50. You can buy a $50 gold coin. You can buy $50 of Bitcoin. A gold coin and a gold brick goes up and down as the same percentage. So I view it as an asset class. I view most cryptocurrencies more like a stock asset that goes up and down. And then central, digitals and stable coins more like a settlement.
And Sandeep, how about you? How do you
Yeah,
view?
I think there are a couple of points. In principle, I agree with Stephen, but it's not being regulated the way Stephen you laid it out. Right. The fact is that right now it's being regulated both as a currency, as an asset class, and and again also as what I call is an arbitrage instrument. It's really all those three. It's kind of like a polymorphic element, right? It's being regulated from all those three perspectives. Call it a hedge or call it revenue maximization or retaining control. Okay, but the two things that are there, I think that the key point is where we all of us are is the fact is all this the central call it this digital currency is really a digital form of cash. Okay? That's what it is, and the reason is that because of inclusion and because it's a very powerful policy lever, right? Be able to reach out to people, being able to tax, being able to affect a certain class of people over duration. It's just another powerful instrument. I think that's universally recognized, and that's what's driving policy regulation. That's the first part. The second is there's also another element which is kind of playing in here. It's what I call the fear of missing out, right? And as you say, the three parts are, on one hand, it's really in what is being dealt with the private currencies. Okay, so when it comes to India, it's all about who can hold, how can you trade, how do you pay taxes on the transactions. So it's really all about the private exchanges between people and businesses. That's really the subject of all this, debate, volatility, and schizophrenia, if you will.
And that's the distinction I draw. And again, if we got our terminology in the lane, I use stock. If I buy Apple stock, I'm going to be taxed on it if it goes up. If the government said, hey, we'll accept Apple stock as a form of payment for your taxes, if I could fractionalize my Apple stock, send it to the government, they convert it to cash, I'm taxed on the asset as stock, even though I can use it as payment. Calling the cryptocurrency a currency that the banks are going to hold. Bitcoin does multiple things because it's digital. So that's why I get frustrated. The terminology is where we really need help. And Bitcoin to me is an asset that can be used as payment. If it goes up, tax me just like you would as an asset, but you don't tax me on my currency. You tax me on the interest I earn, but you don't tax me on the currency.
Yeah, and I think, Stephen, you're right. But the risk is that what it looks like, it could get taxed as an asset. That means on the valuation of the asset on a particular date, right? So you end up effectively what's called eating the highs and the lows, right? So that's it is not clear where it would really it would end up. But I think the bigger point is, at this stage, it's moved so far ahead. We are in a crypto world. It's just a fact of life as we live it, and it's unstoppable. I mean, in some form or the other, digital cash, call it central currency. So not participating or banning is we're past that threshold where that was an option. I think we are really past that entire point.
I would agree with that. And
yeah.
Just to add briefly to the tax conversation, rather than and interesting points on the tax on whether it's taxed as an asset or taxed as a gain on the asset. I think another interesting point about a national crypto is it can make the tax collection process, which is abysmal in just about every country and inequitable, it can make it much fairer. You can have effectively a transaction tax, a sales tax. It's close to mercantile tax almost. On the transaction, where the funds are just a small percentage taken out with the transaction and then going straight to the government. So it benefits the government in that they don't have to wait basically effectively 2.5 years before they get their tax on a transaction. And it greatly helps the consumer because not only does a lot of tax revenues get wasted in the endless collection of it, but for the consumer, we consume in a phenomenal amount of time trying to figure out the arcane set of tax rules that we have in most countries, generally put in place by thousands of lobbyists lobbying for every kind of industry. So it would be possible to have an instant, somewhat painless tax that is somewhat equitable, somewhat progressive, fair in that respect, saves the government a phenomenal amount of money collecting it, but even more importantly, saves the enormous amount of productivity that we all spend filling out these endless and idiotic tax forms.
I don't disagree, but then the nefarious side for the governments is if everything's digital, all my dollars.
Yeah.
In the U.S., there's a battle. The example I use is universal health care. If the government's giving me health care and obesity is a big problem, the government can preclude me from buying a Diet Coke after 9 p.m. because if everything's digital, they then can control my habits of what I buy and when. And again, some of the aspect for Satoshi was not only around banking, it was around consumer controls.
Yeah.
So the governments would love to have everything digital because then they can not only track for tax, they can control my habits.
I think, Steve, I strongly agree. And I think that's the other part. The community that drove the adoption that got us to this point, actually, that's a key point, right? The anonymity and the fact that you have the entire freedom. And suddenly with government-controlled currencies, in fact, if, from what you said, John, because it's digital, because it's fully trackable, fully controllable, it's fully pullable. I don't have to do anything, right? Digitally, I can pull it in and out at will. I can evaporate it, and I can track it to an infinite degree. Those are significant downsides. So I think that which means that is all that implies is it won't be the only currency in existence across the board.
Right.
We'd have private.
From 8 years ago, when I thought it would have many advantages, I still think many of those advantages are in place, but that concern, these concerns that Steve and yourself, all of you have expressed, I think are very much with us right now because my confidence in government has eroded rather.
And I think it's going to be a coexistence of both, what I call private virtual currencies or tokens from, for again, call it business to business or limited or large groups, at least in closed networks transacting, and then central bank currencies. We will be in a dual world, and so that's what it's most likely.
I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to control something now at this stage at present that we're in, something that is so decentralized and something that has a very powerful movement behind it, right? So it's going to be extremely difficult for even if bans are in place in certain countries to stop that. It's so decentralized today. And I think the key challenge of governments will start to become how do you control that decentralization from a periphery as opposed to how do you centralize that decentralization? That's my personal view.
I think there's something of a consensus here. We've got 2 minutes left, so does everyone just want to take about half a minute with closing thoughts and takeaways for the audience?
I'll go first. I love digital. I love crypto. I think there's a future for all of the functionality and things it can do. I just think as an industry, we need to do ourselves a service in creating terminology. So terminology allows us to better understand what things are. Calling everything a cryptocurrency just creates misnomers where then we can't define usage, taxation, regulation. Like what we worked on in Malta, we created virtual financial assets to actively create a terminology, and then that terminology was used across all governmental agencies. So I'm a big stickler on words because words matter, and with words, people can better understand action, and then action leads to.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep.
Yeah, I just like to mention 2 points. One is I think there's now way too much inertia, and it is impossible to stop. And I don't think slowing helps. But the bigger point is this is the one area where the policy needs to kind of get ahead and not stay behind and wait and watch, because the structures are going to get defined, and you could get totally left out. So this one, waiting, watching, see what the rest of the world does, how the China plays out on the central bank. I think it is actually risky. And the third is the notion of, we love blockchain, the technology, which is really powerful and all other stuff, but we don't like crypto. They are enmeshed, the mathematics, the entire transacting security, the mathematics is too coupled that decoupling is not possible, and so you can't have one without the other. The two are more intertwined than most people would like to believe and want. So.
Indeed. Swaneet?
Look, I absolutely agree with Sandeep and Stephen, actually, with what they've said. What I would say is, and completely divergent, is that just like I wouldn't propose, and this was one of the questions on the on this actual panel, just like I wouldn't propose my father or anybody to put 100% of their money into Bitcoin, I wouldn't say don't put anything into Bitcoin. So the same thing goes for the central banking assets, right? If they would want to diversify part of their asset class into digital currency, I think they should up to a limit. That's how I would close.
So I just want to add one point. He's right that this was an area, and I thought there's an interesting simulation data from many countries that about the safe threshold for a central bank is 0.01 to 0.3%. So, in terms of banks actually holding crypto asset, that's about the threshold. It's same where you're immune from volatility, and you could have a portfolio from a few million to $1 trillion, but it's about that percentage at the central bank level.
Yeah, I agree.
0.01 to 0.03.
0.03, right? Yeah, it's a number of that magnitude. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
So that's what the simulation data shows, where you are robust to fluctuations and other problems.
Sure. Like the Basel requirements, etc.
All of it, yeah.
So just wanted to check. There's a question from the audience. John, would you like to take anything, or is it over?
Yes, we're technically over time, but I think we can just continue. So let's see if we can address some of those questions. You want to just read out that question, save time?
Well, he's asking if he could ask a question. So Sriram, maybe if you want to type a question now, and then maybe we'll take it.
Yes, I see it.
He's requesting the mic. Yeah.
So we're giving him the mic to ask the question. Sriram, go ahead. Sriram, can you hear us?
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sriram.
Sorry, it's taking a bit. Very interesting conversation, really insightful views. On CBDC, a quick question. Now, clearly, the fiat currency has a very, very useful case, because you can literally send it to the last mile. So the person holding it, and essentially it can be used for a variety of ways, including extinguishing debt. That's one of the fundamental features of fiat currency. For a digital currency, what the government will have to do, will have to ensure that the infrastructure is there so that the last person to whom that dollar or that rupee, the digital rupee, has to go, should be available for him to use, similar to a fiat currency, and for extinguishing debt, very similar to fiat currency. That would essentially mean that he needs to have a mobile device with him or her, at the last mile space. Would that mean, do you think countries have in place the digital infrastructure to introduce CBDC? Thanks.
I'll go first, if you like. I think ultimately that can be fulfilled with very inexpensive smartphones. Even just a basic text phone is sufficient to allow the unbanked to participate. But now everyone else chip in on that.
Sriram, I'll just say one other point. Let's assume if the identity issue is solved, then technically it's not far off. The one thing working for India is, at least, I don't know what the penetration of Aadhaar or all of these mechanisms is in terms of identity, because the two aspects to it, right? Having a phone still doesn't identify the money to the person. It only identifies where it is. So it's probably easier for India than for many other countries. But it is a challenge from the authentication. You're tying the money to you, not to your device.
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely astute observation or comment by Sriram. I think that it is going to be a challenge, particularly in a country like India, to make sure that everybody has a mobile device and make sure that everybody has that. But I think we're not arguing fiat currency's existence here. We are just, I think what we're all trying to say is that a CBDC or central banking digital currency will prove to be beneficial for the overall economy in general. I think, that is what I believe that's what we're all sort of saying. It's difficult to.
Is so long as the government use this powerful tool for good responsibly.
Yeah. I was going to say again, to me, words matter. The argument that you were making, Sriram, was more about access. So whether I have access to a mobile phone precludes me from having banking. I can have mobile banking. As long as I have a mobile phone, I can open a bank account with certain restrictions. So the access to the technology is an on-ramp into a financial system, whether it's traditional banking, digital debit cards, gift cards, like that's an access issue, not a technology issue. And, just like we were saying, it's the technology, Swaneet, is going to allow more functionality. Digital just gives you more functionality, and with functionality comes greater controls and greater flexibility. That's where I think we're heading. But the access, people have been trying to solve the bottom billion access to mobile phones just for money for a decade or more.
Okay, now, so gentleman from Afghanistan, Sham, did you want to ask a question? I'll invite you onto the stage, if so. Oh. Okay, there's several people there who may be wanting to ask questions. Any of you just step up, ask to the microphone if you do. Otherwise, we'll bring the session to a close. Okay, I don't see any right now. So basically, I really want to thank all the panelists. I think it's been a very informed discussion. I think it's a very important topic. There's so much potential for good, for greater efficiency, but it's a very powerful tool that Satoshi has gifted to the world, and we have to make sure we use it responsibly.
Agreed.
Any other quick comments, and then probably
No, thank you. I think this is quite interesting, and I'm glad to be part of the panel and it's nice to speak with all of you. So,
likewise.
My comment is I love digital, but I like in person better, because for those of us on the 2:30 in the morning is always fun. I'd rather these all be in person, but it's great to be able to participate with anything Frank does, and for everybody in the audience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Very, very useful, very fruitful. I'll now stop. Well, I think we have everyone. Okay, I'll stop streaming now. Thank you all.